Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Make UK joint webinar with Visiative on Spring Budget Summary and R&D tax credits. I'll just give it 30 seconds and then we'll kick off. Right, so my name is Faye Skelton. I am Head of Policy at Make UK, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. We have some colleagues from Make UK and some also Sandy and Doug from Visiative to discuss R&D tax credits. We'll just do a round of introductions and then we'll kick off. So if I hand over to Fahim to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fahim Khan. I'm a senior economist at Make UK's policy team. Today, we'll be covering over the full expensing announcements that were made in the spring statement and the recovery loan scheme as well.
Thanks. Nina. You're on mute, Nina. That was very early days to go be muted.
I know, sorry. Nina Griff, Senior Policy Manager here at Make UK, and I'm covering innovation, tech and digital policy areas at Make UK.
Great. Sandy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sandy Finlay from Visiative, and I have my colleague Doug Reid on as well today. He's Tax Director for Visiative. We're going to spend some time talking about the recent changes over the last 18 months to the R&D tax relief scheme and the implications for you as a company claiming, and then a short list of things to do to minimise the impact of those changes on your business and your claim. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're going to be doing the spring budget overview first. That'll be quite a short session because no spoilers, but there wasn't a huge amount as much as there was in the autumn statement to do with manufacturing policy announcements. We'll pick up any Q&A if there is Q&A during that session. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box. Then I'll hand over to Sandy and Doug, and they'll go through the R&D tax updates. And then we'll put 5 polling questions on the screen, and we'd really welcome you to fill out the polling. It helps Sandy and his team, but it also helps us, particularly when we're talking to government about things, to have those to have that really rich data set. And then we'll pick up any further Q&A as well. I think that's what we really want to do, actually, is rather than just us speaking at you, she says, speaking at you, to actually have more of a conversation, particularly through questions. I think that's probably the best way of teasing out some really interesting topics of discussion. Okay, so just really quickly before I hand over to Fahim, the autumn statement, which was only in November, so it was only 4 months ago, which is quite rare to have such a short period between 2 fiscal statements from the Treasury. Was a business-focused fiscal statement, and we had a few really good policy wins or policy announcements, so particularly on the full expensing being made permanent, and also Made Smarter being rolled out throughout England and also the devolved nations a year later. But there was also some extra things in there which I won't go into, but we've got some things on the website if you want to look at that. This particular fiscal statement was trailed as a more household focused event. There was, most of 90% of the budget was actually released in the media beforehand, so lots of things about tax cuts which you will be aware of, but there were a few manufacturing friendly policy announcements which we'll go through. So I hand over to Fahim.
Thank you, Faye. So making full expensing or getting that made permanent in November last year was, a very big win for us. And of course, just once again, for those of us or those of you who are, the manufacturers on the audience, just thank you all for the support that you provided Make UK, because it was an overall a collective effort between Make UK and its members that made that come through. Of course, it's, the job is just about half done. Making it permanent is just getting the government to see that we need long-term support from the industry, and it's time we're done with short-term piecemeal solutions. Leasing is an interesting, like the government has committed to propose on that, and will implement it in their words when economic conditions allow. So it's not a guarantee, but it suggests that if the things improve, then they will include it. From our perspective, leasing is important for manufacturing. It is a method of accessing plant machinery, although it's not that widely used. About 14% of manufacturers in our survey show that they use leasing as a way to access plant machinery. So it's not the most common method, and most businesses prefer to buy if they can. But this will certainly help SMEs, perhaps relatively more. And it's a good option to have. For most manufacturers, it's also about the option of being able to purchase plant machinery or lease it, and not having the government necessarily decide for you that you need to buy it or lease it. It gives manufacturers the option. Of course, this will be, getting leasing through the door is not just about, whether or not it supports manufacturers. It's also about opening the doors to potentially expanding even further. So I was thinking about whether or not we can introduce secondhand plant machinery in the future, if we are able to proceed in those kind of in that positive direction, then we can certainly say that, if we can get leasing through the door, then maybe we can get secondhand plant machinery through the door as well, and then we can start opening conversations around expanding to software and that sort of thing, which, at the moment, software can meet the definition of plant in some cases, but it's not very easy to do that. And I think that it's not clear exactly how the government can do that. So a lot of work to be done. But again, it's so far been great news for the industry that we do have 100% capital allowances, which makes the UK currently the 5th most generous country in the OECD for how it treats capital expenditure. So we're doing quite well there. Moving on, I think we're looking at the recovery loan scheme. It's very interesting. We weren't actually expecting this particular announcement, but I think it's a good thing that it has been made. It supports businesses that perhaps are still maybe struggling from the pandemic, but government has rightly done so rename the scheme into the Growth Guarantee Scheme, which suggests that we are moving away from focusing on recovering from past shocks to the economic environment and now focusing on future growth. I think a few things are worth noting about what this scheme is. It is kind of a variation of the CBIL, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, where part of the funding is backed by government, so 70% of loans are guaranteed by government. But the thing to note about that, and it might be obvious to most manufacturers, that the guarantee is specifically to the lenders, not to the borrower. So the borrower is still liable to pay the full loan, but the lender is protected for 70% of the loan, which makes lenders more willing to give loans to riskier businesses. So that's the kind of the benefit and the approach. But it's important to know exactly what that 70% guarantee means. If you want to be eligible for that, you have to be trading in the UK, earning a turnover of 45 million pounds or less. Interestingly, within the website, on the government site, it says you need to demonstrate that you are a viable business that is not in difficulty, which makes me question what this funding scheme is about if it's only for businesses that are not struggling. But that's another conversation we can have. But you can use it if you have used CBIL loans in the past. So sometimes members have told us that they have struggled to access finance from lenders because they had CBIL loans on their balance sheets. But actually, the recovery loan scheme wouldn't immediately remove you from accessing those funding. It's not the widest variety of types of loans either. It's typical kind of generic loans, asset finance, overdrafts, and invoice finance that the facility offers. And the terms of the loans depends on whether or not it's long-term finance or short-term. Long-term is up to 6 years and short-term is up to 3 years. So, definitely, consider whether or not that, it's a useful facility to have if you are struggling, but you should consider whether or not you actually need it before you use it. I mean, it's interesting, but it's still debt from the business's perspective, whether it's a government's backed debt or privately backed debt, it doesn't really matter. So that's important. But overall, positive news from the government's perspective to continue supporting this scheme.
Thanks, Faheen. To be honest, I hadn't clocked that the line in their own guidance about you need to be a viable business, or however they phrased it, which is very interesting. Always the sentences which are digging sort of not highlighted on their press releases. I'm going to hand over to Nina to talk through AI funding.
Can you hear me? Great. So boosting AI funding is always a very good news for the economy. We want our research centers and institutions to be competitive globally. The Alan Turing Institute got £100 million investment. This is National Institute for Data Science and AI. This funding is spread over 5 years, and the Alan Turing Institute is focusing on the challenges, and the challenges are around health and well-being, environment and sustainability, defense and national security. So this is where they're going to focus all these finance and investment to go into finding the solutions for all the incoming challenges. So this is great news for manufacturers. However, we still think there is quite a huge gap between our great research and knowledge institutions and how the knowledge and research is diffused into the practical applications of AI. There are programs like Made Smarter, adoption programs that can help manufacturers to adopt technologies, digital technologies like AI, and some others too. However, we need to see a slightly bigger focus on adoption of these digital technologies like AI, especially now with the generative AI being so popular and so easily accessible by businesses as well. They can change and impact the efficiency and productivity, especially starting from the back office. So we would like to see more activities around the adoption there. There's some programs already announced last year, like AI Bridge, that is run by Innovate UK, and it finances startups and universities as well. So it's like focus on the businesses and how it can access AI. However, it's still not a lot around scaling up these technologies to be used in practice as we would like to see. That's all from me.
Thanks, Nina. So yeah, I think summary there is great news for the funding announcement, but it still feels quite disjointed, joining it all up. And then finally, there was an announcement of £365 million of funding for R&D across what the government is calling their sort of growth sector, so life sciences, automotive and aerospace sectors. This is something that government tends to do. It re-announces pre-existing funding that is already announced. So this is not new funding, but I think nevertheless it's something that to be drawn. When it wasn't a business-focused fiscal statement, I think we would welcome the focus on manufacturing sector. More broadly, on the week of the autumn statement, the government announced and published its advanced manufacturing plan, which Make UK welcomed. It's definitely a good start, but I think the word there is start. It is not a long-term plan. It is a 5, possibly a 10-year plan, and it does go some way about aligning some of the, particularly the green energy sectors quite well. But we would like to see the advanced manufacturing plan move into an industrial strategy, which particularly looks at things like skills, digitalisation, which Nina just mentioned, but also refreshing and tying in our export strategy as well. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen just to see if we've got any Q&A. If we don't, that's fine. We can go straight on to Sandy's presentation. So I can see we haven't, so just bear with me, I'll pop it back up again. You should see that now. Over to you, Sandy.
We've still got the advanced manufacturing slide here. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for logging on today. I just want to take 15 minutes to talk through at quite a high level some of the changes that we've been hit with in the last 18 months in the R&D tax relief scheme. For those of you who are dealing with your own claims, maybe preparing your own claims, I think you'll feel a bit punch drunk by now, the number of changes and the speed with which they've come in. And we'll talk about the implications of those changes to you and your R&D claim, and then we'll give some pointers on things you can do to minimize the impact. So the first thing to say is that at a high level, we've got an obvious reduction in benefits coming in there. So I think for SMEs, profit-making SMEs, there's an overall reduction of 39% in the benefit you get. For loss-making SMEs, when the new changes come in April this year, it's going to be a 55% reduction in your benefits. Increased confusion, the number of changes. So last April, we had the introduction of prior notifications for companies who hadn't claimed in the previous 2 years. In August last year, we had the introduction of the additional information form that companies needed to submit with their claim. And in another 3 weeks' time, we're going to have the merging of the SME scheme with the RDEC scheme. On top of that, increased administration requirements. So the prior notification, the additional information forms all require additional administration from yourselves. As a company, in the last year, we've seen one of our employees switch full-time to completing additional information forms for our clients. And that's fine. We deal with a number of 100 claims a year. Individual companies might not necessarily have that same resource. And again, if somebody completes 2 additional information forms every day, it becomes easier to do and becomes more routine. On top of that, over the last 2 years, we've seen an increasing vigilance on the part of HMRC assessors. That leads to an increase in the number of arbitrary inquiries. For ourselves, we've seen our average inquiry rate go up from maybe 3 to 6 a year up to, I think we had 80 open inquiries at the end of November. The numbers are starting to fall now, but significant increase. And we know from speaking to other providers in the marketplace, they're seeing the same levels of inquiry. On top of that, the additional information requirements form has actually seen a huge increase in the number of claims that have been voided by HMRC, particularly in the first few months from early August last year through to late September, early October. More than 50% of all R&D claims submitted to HMRC were voided or returned to the company because they hadn't completed the additional information form or they hadn't completed it fully. Next slide, Faye. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can do that myself. I wasn't sure if you'd given control or not. Right, so in 3 weeks' time, we will see the SME scheme disappear for most companies. If you're a profit-making company or if you're a loss-making SME and you spend less than 30% of your annual expenditure on R&D, you will start to make a claim through the RDEC scheme. So it's basically the same scheme that large companies were using or SMEs who were affected by grants have been using to date. Our main concern is there's still limited clarity on the details of that scheme. So we know that HMRC still hasn't issued any guidance on things like dealing with subcontracted R&D. And there was a significant culture change 3 years ago in HMRC's interpretation of subsidised R&D or subcontracted R&D. We're now, the mood we're getting from HMRC is that their outlook, their view on subcontracted or subsidised R&D is now swinging back to where it was prior to 2020, but we're looking for that in writing. And there is going to be a separate scheme from April for those R&D intensive loss-making businesses. So their loss of benefit will be slightly less than typical loss-making SMEs. Their benefit reduction will go down at 19% from April 23 through to April 24. And next, see if I can do that. There we go. Just to summarize the changes in benefit, from April last year through to April this year, the typical SME will see its net benefit for £100 spent go from £24.70 down to £15. So that's your 39% reduction. Most loss-making SMEs will go from £33.35 benefit in £100 spent down to again down to £15, because they'll get the same cash back as they would get for a tax relief under the RDEX scheme. So they will see the biggest impact, and it will be about 55%. We think the real impact there will be on young, innovative companies, early stage companies who are still in the technology development phase. The other issue in this whole process will be the definition of R&D intensive SMEs. So HMRC started by saying that the qualifying level would be 40%. They've reduced that down to 30% more recently. There is still some there's still some flexibility in terms of how you demonstrate that you're spending 30% of your qualifying expenditure or your total expenditure on qualifying R&D, and we think that that creates a problem. We also think that R&D intensive scheme will impact on a very small number of companies. Doug will probably be able to tell us more accurately than I can, but I think we estimated it was in the thousands when it was announced last year. Is that right, Doug?
Yeah. I mean, HMRC came out and said they thought that it would impact between 3,500 and 5,000 claimants, but that's obviously based on their internal claim data, which so we have to rely perhaps on that.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Next slide, Faye. Thank you. Prior notification. As of April last year, any companies who hadn't submitted a claim within the 2 previous years are required now to notify HMRC within 6 months of the year end that they're intending to make a claim. Now, you don't have to make the claim within the 6 months, but you have to clearly communicate with HMRC you're making that claim. For us, the main burden becomes, again, administrative. So within a 6-month period, your management team has to assess the value of R&D expenditure over the last financial year. It needs to assess the likely eligibility of those projects for R&D relief, and then make the submission. And we do think it won't be a significant barrier to companies, but we do think it will be a barrier to some companies. And again, particularly where you've got small companies with smaller management teams and the lack of resource to do that analysis and to submit the prior notification. Next slide, please. Additional information from 1st of August last year. Every R&D claim submitted now requires an online information form to be completed. And it sounds less onerous when you say it. When you see the form and when you work your way through it, there's a lot of information in there. So every R&D claim now that's submitted or is to be assessed by HMRC needs full company details. That includes, all the usual things: registration address, registration number, VAT number, PAYE number, tax reference number. It then looks for contact details, so a primary officer within the company who will be responsible for the R&D tax relief claim. your tax advisor's details, and if you're using a third-party R&D provider, they ask the details of the third-party R&D provider. You will then need to submit, as part of that additional information, a breakdown of eligible costs. Those costs need to be categorized and catalogued, so they're looking for a split in terms of staffing costs. That would include externally provided workers, subcontractors. They're then looking for materials, so raw materials and consumables, utilities. If you are using third-party data providers to analyze data, they'll be looking for those costs there, any software costs, and so on. And again, they're looking for more detail to be applied to the recording and the reporting of these costs. And then the final part, which we think is probably the most onerous for most companies, will be detailed descriptions of the appropriate number of projects. So if you have 1 to 3 projects that you're submitting a claim for, they will ask you to complete a project report on all 3 projects. And that will have to, again, the detail is very important. So those 3 projects, you'll need to detail the advance in science and technology you were looking to achieve, the technical uncertainties you identified at the start of the project that needed to be addressed in order to achieve the advance, the work packages that were undertaken in addressing those challenges, and the competent professionals who were involved in undertaking the work package. If you're submitting a relief claim for between 3 and 10 projects, you need to submit a minimum of 3 reports and a number of reports that covers up to, more than 50% of your eligible expenditure. And if you've got more than 10 projects involved in your claim, they're then looking for the number of projects that equates to or amounts to at least 50% of the eligible expenditure. Now, again, for organizations like ourselves, that's less onerous because we've been following all of these additional information requirements for the last 13 or 14 years. But for companies who have not been through the process before, who haven't been exposed to these rigors, that can become quite a drain in terms of admin and staffing time. Next slide, please, Faye. And how do you deal with this? First thing is really being attentive to the detail. So particularly in terms of tracking and recording costs and tracking and recording activities. Those are the 2 areas where we're finding the HMRC are raising the majority of their inquiries or are slowing down the processing of claims because they feel they don't have sufficient information there. So just be really careful. Make sure you've got plenty of detail in there. And again, that format that I just run through, the advance in science or technology, the technical uncertainties, the work packages, the staff involved. That's the type of thing they're looking for. They're also looking for clarity in the explanations of why something was defined as an advance in science or technology, why something was seen as a technical uncertainty, and it is all about that. We had one claim which went into inquiry a few months ago, and the consultant said to me that when he first phoned the assessor and asked why the assessor didn't think this was a technical uncertainty or an advance in science and technology, the assessor said, I Googled it and there was lots of stuff reported in Google online. So I therefore think it's not innovative, because if it was innovative, I wouldn't be able to find stuff on Google. Now, if we're coping with that, individual companies who are doing their own claims are getting the same issues as we are. So attention to detail. Again, I think, Doug, I'm right in saying that a significant number of the projects that are going into inquiry, there are questions on the categorization of costs and the accuracy of costs as well.
Yeah, as you say, Sandy, it's definitely I mean, that was the biggest change the industry's seen for a long time, given that claimants before only had to put in one not round number, but one number in their tax return, and that was your R&D claim submitted. So the fact that they have to be broken down by cost category and project is certainly the biggest thing, because you have to define when projects commence and end, and particularly in relation to staff who've been working on them, when their time has been working on them, rather than grouping that into a whole bunch of projects. So certainly that's where HMRC are aware that people weren't all over before, you would say, and hadn't perhaps kept the required level of records. So certainly an area of concern for them. And as you say, Sandy, particularly our inquiries are now 90% focused on really the technical area, the technical eligibility. And you mentioned the Google check. That's perhaps one of the easiest methods for them to check, but particularly it's around demonstrating at what point in time your project was now you were aiming to do the advance, because things move on so quickly. And I think in one of those instances you were talking about, the assessors, HMRC, were looking at it now and assessing what you'd done, but you'd actually undertaken the work now 1.5 to 2 years ago by the time they'd reviewed it, and therefore at that point in time you would have to demonstrate that at that point in time that would be an advance. So you have to have the relevant documentation in hand there to get over them checking it now and saying, well, there's lots there now, so how was yours novel back then? So
yeah, that's a fair point, Doug. I hadn't even thought of mentioning that, but a lot of these assessors who are looking at the claims at the moment aren't necessarily expert or experienced in the field that your claim will be in. So you can't naturally assume that if you're an engineering company, the person that's looking at your claim has a background in engineering, or if you're a software development company, it's not guaranteed that the assessor will have experience or relevant qualifications or understanding of software development. I think that's fair to say, Doug, yeah.
Yeah, just prepared, be prepared, have enough documentation to be prepared to fight your position, I think is the position now, where in the past there was probably an element of complacency in the R&D claimant market, where at the time you believed it was R&D, you had some internal R&D plan documentation. You really need to make sure that is as detailed as it will be for a year, 2 years down the line when you have to defend what you're claiming. So
yeah, that's fair enough. I think alongside of that is answer all the questions fully. I think you have to assume that whoever's reading your R&D tax relief claim is an idiot. I'm not saying they are, but I think if you assume they're an idiot and you're explaining things to idiots, it kind of puts you in a position where the assumptions fall by the wayside and you're much more explicit, much more clear. Answer all the questions. And the reason I say that is that most of the claims that were voided up to late September, early October last year were voided because companies failed to complete the AIF form fully. So fields were missing. And if there's one field missing, they will return the claim, or will take the claim out of your tax return. So again, in terms of answering all the questions fully, go through that AIF carefully, get somebody else to check the AIF for you. On project reports, again, get somebody to edit or proofread it and check that you've touched those 4 or 5 key points. Be responsive. If you get an inquiry or a request for further information from an HMRC assessor, there will always be a response deadline on the request for more information. Make sure you meet that deadline, because that gives them another reason to void the claim or to stop the claim. Be patient. We are seeing because of the number of inquiries that are being raised, we are seeing that the process time for approving claims is increasing quite significantly in the last 18 months, 2 years. And the final point is blatant self-promotion. If you are doing your own claim, seek expert advice. Again, most of the R&D providers are experiencing the same issues we're experiencing, but as R&D providers who do nothing else, we probably have greater experience in dealing with these issues and these constraints. So we build expertise in making sure we don't get an inquiry, making sure we don't get a return of a claim. And I think that's quite important, particularly for companies who have maybe a history of doing their own claims. I did a number of the Make UK regional advisory boards in Q4 last year, sorry. And I had a number of companies come up to me and ask if we would be able to have a look at their claim because they were worried about satisfying HMRC's information requirements. So just be aware of that. There's a lot of expert advice out there, and in the past, when it might have been easier to put less effort, less time into an R&D claim, you might find a significant increase in the amount of time and effort you need to put into them going forward. And that's really what I want to say this today. We have actually provided another 10 slides at the back of these, which go into each of these points in a lot more detail. But I felt it was probably worthwhile just doing as short a summary as I can, and then that allows more time for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Sandy. So I'm just going to flick through just to show some of the additional information. Just we'll send this round after, but just so everyone can see. Right, so we are going to move to polling questions. Oh, I'm just going to stop my screen there. Which should just come up on the screen with Lois in the background working her magic. Just whilst we're waiting for the polling questions, I think we've got at least 5 members who have Make UK members who have come to Make UK with almost the exact same issues that you've presented, Sandy. So it's obviously a pretty wide scale problem. And I was afterwards, I'll just get your take on whether or not there's anything that Make UK could be doing to represent, trying to get the clarity that is needed. But we'll pause on the poll questions for now. So we've got I think we've got 5 questions. I'd be really appreciative if you could spend the next couple of minutes just filling out your answers. Give it over a couple of seconds and we'll close it. All right, thank you, Lois. That magic. Okay, I'll just do a very quick summary of what we can see on the screen. So the first question was about we basically want to get more information about manufacturers who lease and also secondhand equipment. So in terms of leasing, actually that's pretty much what we would thought. So 79% say no, but there is still a good percentage, 21% that do. On secondhand plant and machinery equipment, pretty split. A bit more balanced than I thought. So 56% say no, but 44% say yes. Something for us to think about. And then moving on to the R&D tax questions. Given the confusing number of changes in the scheme in the last 18 months, are you still would continue to claiming tax relief for R&D? 79% say yes. We can't do this, but wouldn't it be good if we knew what the figure would be before the changes? That would be really handy. And then the next question on reduction of R&D tax relief over the last 18 months have reduced your investment in, and the largest percentage there is NA. and then R&D spend and employing new staff. And then finally, and we won't talk about that because I will just hand that off to Sandy. So that's really helpful. Thank you so much for participating in that. We'll hand over to questions now, so I can see a few in the chat box, and they both look like they're on R&D tax relief. So the first question says, my company hasn't submitted an R&D tax relief claim since the new information requirements came in. How much more information is now required?
Doug, do you want to?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like
So,
a pop the show today.
yeah, I see that. Yeah, I mean, a valid question. I think Sandy covered it. Don't know when the time of the question was, before or after. The detailed slides at the back goes into the, I mean, is there 5, 6 slides perhaps just on the additional information? So that probably gives you an indication that there is a lot of information required. Now that's particularly relevant to claimants because there would have been a wide range of claimants in the past. There was no legal requirement to submit additional documentation before. So people in theory could have submitted nothing. So you could have put a number in your tax return, that would have been it. Your tax return would have probably been processed and your benefit received, and no information was required to be provided. So I'm sure companies probably got complacent and therefore now thought of prepared documentation the year before. I've roughly been doing the same sort of things, and now I've collated some documentation, but not lots. Therefore, you don't have a high level documentation. Now the requirements there are extensive, so you have to be aware of how many projects you have. You have to have written up, as Sandy said, at least 3 of them, if not more. Breaking down costs by project is a particularly burdensome one, because you would have had groups of staff working across multiple projects. You have to allocate them now by project. You'll have material spend that you have to allocate to project to break all that down. So yes, there is a lot more information required, and read those extra slides that Sandy has there put there. But because it came in August, there will certainly be many claimants who haven't as yet got round to submitting their annual claim and won't have gone through it yet. So there will still be a lot of claimants out there who haven't gone through it, and please reach out for assistance if required. On to the second question, Faye. It's a very popular question that we always get, and thankfully, but which is not great news, I guess, for the industry, was that just last week HMRC published some additional guidance, and they noted in there that their aim, whether they're at it or not as yet, but their aim is to review annually 20% of all claimants. So it's either a scare tactic or they are building resource and getting enough information through the additional information form that they will be able to target specifically now 20% of claimants, which, if you look back 2-3 years ago, the amount of the percentage of claimants getting reviewed would be low single figures. So a big uptick in inquiries, and just something that everyone should be prepared for. Now, the additional information form will require you to gather lots of information, so in theory you'll be ready for it, but planning out your R&D and documenting as you go is a necessary requirement for all companies. Waiting till after all the R&D done and trying to they go back and set points in time around documentation is harder than keeping track of it going forward. So certainly an area of concern, but just as long as you have the right processes in place, you will navigate those challenges.
You mentioned, Doug, that that 20% figure that was quoted a couple of weeks ago when I was on a webinar with one of the Big Four. Their senior tax advisor was talking. He mentioned that figure as well. So it's obviously in the marketplace that HMRC have got this unwritten target to raise inquiries on 20% of work. Yeah.
Thanks both. That's really helpful. Just on my point that I was making earlier, is there anything that Make UK could do to, because we obviously can't get involved in individual tax inquiries, but we can represent wider issues?
Yeah, well, I think from our perspective, what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is to work with the policy team. So I've worked quite closely with Nina on presenting the difficulties that these changes are making for SMEs and particularly for manufacturers. And I think we need to keep that pressure of lobby on government departments. So Treasury needs to be aware. I think it's I think it can be quite easy when you're stuck in somewhere like Westminster to make decisions or to develop policies without necessarily looking at the follow through or the impact of those on companies' real lives, and that's important. Doug, again, is there anything else we can do in terms of helping relieve the pressure on SMEs or manufacturers?
I mean, as you know, Make UK we've worked closely with them over a number of years. We've responded to the most recent consultation around explanation requirements for this new merge scheme coming in. But yeah, perhaps there's I mean, we hope the government have said that's the raft of their changes coming to an end. They're going to wait to see the impact that makes moving forward. Whether that's true or not, we'll wait and see. And if there's a change in government on the horizon, then I guess we'll have to wait and see if they have the same. They have stated, I mean, Labour stated in a recent announcement in their political statement that they stood by the R&D scheme as a incentive for all companies to innovate and grow. So we know they do like it. Whether that will be exactly the way they treat going forward, we'll wait and see.
I think that's maybe another valid point, though, Faye, is I think there's a role for Make UK and the other trade bodies to be emphasising and maintaining the pressure on both parties. If Labour take power this year, they need to appreciate that further changes or tinkering with the scheme is only going to cause problems for manufacturers. So I think Doug's right. You know, I know that Labour have said they're supportive of the scheme, but they also need to be aware that there's been so many changes recently that most manufacturers are seeing serious impact.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Because you could see further down the line, if they did come to power, it'd only take a couple of years before they possibly might look at something like this and start tinkering around the edges. But the wider scale impact of just changing for change's sake is not always appreciated. We have a new question in the chat. Shouldn't the tax advice or the R&D industry be responding together to give more weight to representations?
So yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, as you know, and the industry as a whole, so we speak with industry bodies. So Make UK obviously being one of them, but particularly the Chartered Institute of Taxation and the ATT as well. We speak with them, who also lobby government on behalf of the, I guess, tax advice market. And yes, individual companies obviously responding can then be therefore seen as coming only with your own views, but from our speaking with the policy team, the consultations, they very much like to get a view from as many as possible, because therefore, similar to those polling questions, they then therefore get a consensus of everyone's opinion and can get across those rather than everyone grouping and having one response. So I think more responses are certainly better from their point of view. The question then is how much HMRC take it on board and how much they actually have their own predetermined agenda anyway. So
I think that's a big part of the issue, Doug, is we also quite a number of R&D providers sit on the RDCC, which is HMRC's
RDCF, so the communication forum. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so quite a few of the providers have given them this information and have fed back to them on the potential implications of the changes. But I think Doug's right in that they may be listening to what we in the trade bodies say. They may not necessarily take it on board. I kind of get the feeling, I don't know how you feel, Doug, but I kind of get the feeling a lot of the changes that have been made recently, despite the consultations, they weren't necessarily waiting on the consultations to make the changes. They were going to make these changes anyway.
Yes, well, I mean, if you look at now, we're still in a consultation period at the moment, even though they've already released the legislation for the new merged schemes. So they're still consulting on guidance that's going to come out around it. So that seems very strange that you've already got legislation in place, but you're going to change the guidance.
And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, very linked question. RDCF is a bit of a closed shop. Do you think our HMRC are looking to flush out fraud with a 20% claimant review?
Yes, so I mean their aim throughout the whole process has been to, I mean, eliminate fraud and reduce error, I think is probably the way, because they throw around fraud and error in the same statement, although it can be too, because self-claimants, how can they fully always be aware of everything to be included, not included, etc. So that's probably error, fraud. Certainly there has been fraud in the past, and some of those cases have came to fruition and have been in the news, which is two very different matters, I guess. But yes, I mean the additional information form, I think will flush out a lot, as you said there, flush out fraud. The flush out the fact that now claims could be made before without any information to it, so there was no backup required, there's nothing. So that certainly you'll have to have now projects, etc., to demonstrate they can quickly go through them and find out if you're now not projects, not claims, etc. So yes, 20% claim review. I think it might bring some more legitimacy as well to the market, because there's no longer that attitude of I can put a claim in and never have to worry about getting reviewed. Therefore, I don't have to spend as much time assessing or get proper advice in it. Surely that 20% will increase the risk of review and therefore decrease people's appetite to push the boundaries. Hopefully, that is certainly our hope in a regulated market is certainly the way forward. So.
And I can sense Sarah's frustration that error is due to the complexity in the process, and I think we probably all agree with that.
Yeah, true, and that's why I say they talk about fraud and error in the same bracket, which I think is definitely not right. So when they talk about there's a fraud and error rate of X, I think that's incorrect, because you should have there's a fraud rate and a separate error stroke mistake, because as you say it is complex, so clearly errors can be made. So.
Thanks. I see we've got a question on leasing. So we lease a fleet of vans. Can we get tax release for leasing these, or do they come under leased equipment? I'll hand over to Fahim, but to bear in mind, we've only actually currently got the government intention to extend the full expensing program to cover leasing. It hasn't yet got a timetable when it's going to come in. But I'll hand over to Fahim. I think the answer probably is TBC.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too sure. I mean, cars are treated, vans and lorries and that sort of thing are treated differently, generally in capital allowances anyway. So they don't usually qualify for expenditure. So if you buy them, and they often usually don't anyway qualify for leasing, even if leasing itself was qualifiable for plant machinery, they don't usually translate for vehicles. However, I think there is a separate allowance with a different percentage that it can be applied to vehicles. I don't know exactly what that is off the top of my head, but it wouldn't be 100% capital allowances, unfortunately. So even if we do get leasing, I wouldn't say TBC to vans. It might not still qualify.
Thanks, Fahim. I think we're coming towards the end of the questions, so I'm going to wrap up unless another one pops up on the sidebar very quickly. Thank you everyone for attending and participating. Hopefully you found that helpful. I know I certainly did. We will send round the slide pack. I'm also going to include a survey. This is a bit of a shameless Make UK plea, but we've got a live survey out on Red Sea disruptions and whether or not members are experiencing adverse effects from what we've seen in the news in the Red Sea. We really appreciate if you could complete that. It should only take 5 minutes. It just help us have a better understanding on what the effects are for UK manufacturers, and also will help our conversations when we're talking to government on particular trading and export policy asks. So we'll include that as well. And yeah, please do get in touch with Sandy and Doug if you think that there's that you need your help or you need some guidance, because they are definitely the experts when it comes to this. Okay, thank you everyone for coming along, and hopefully we will speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, bye.